If you intend on winning a war, it's kind of important that you have soldiers who are actually willing to fight for you. Apparently, nobody gave Vladimir Putin that memo. Russia's president believes that he can obscure the brutality of what goes on in Ukraine with offers of massive pay packets. However, even those monetary promises no longer seem to be enough to convince Russia's soldiers to keep fighting. They want to stop, and Putin doesn't seem able to convince them that dying horribly to complete his special military operation is a good idea. Mass surrender has erupted in the Russian army as Putin's troops refuse to fight. Putin is losing control of his own men, which gives Ukraine an important advantage as the war heads into 2026. Back on December 31st, United 24 media reported on data published by Ukraine's coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war that flew a little under the radar as 2025 came to an end. That data showed that a remarkable number of Russian soldiers have been captured since Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and even more interestingly, 2025 has brought with it the highest number of surrenders to date. How many Russian soldiers have been captured by Ukraine? More than 10,000 and counting in a little under 4 years, which is a number so massive that it begs the question of why it's happening. We'll cover some of the answers to that question throughout the video. However, perhaps the biggest answer is that Ukraine has set up a project designed to enable Russia's soldiers to submit themselves for capture, no matter where they are on the front lines. That program is called I Want to Live, and it's one of the many examples of creativity that Ukraine has showcased ever since Putin started his expansionist war. I Want to Live makes a very attractive offer to a Russian soldier who wants to get out of the war. You can visit the I Want to Live project on its own website, where you'll immediately see that it offers multiple lines of communication that a Russian soldier could open up with the program. Among those lines is a chatbot available directly on the website, along with a link to a Telegram channel and a Contact Us page that a soldier can use to send messages to their potential Ukrainian captors. Therein lies the genius of the entire concept. Ukraine isn't only offering peaceful surrender to Russia's forces, it's also making it as easy as possible for Putin's soldiers to throw in the towel. All it takes is a quick message, and the wheels are set in motion. I Want to Live also makes plenty of promises to the surrendering soldiers, with full compliance with the Geneva Conventions on the treatment of prisoners being front and center. That treatment alone is better than what many of Russia's soldiers receive in their own military, making surrender an even more enticing proposition. The soldiers are also promised detention in decent conditions, along with 3 meals daily, medical care, and the ability to contact their families. Sensationalistic, though not necessarily untrue, reports in December have claimed that some Russian troops are so hungry that they've plotted to eat their comrades, which tells you what you need to know about the food situation for Russia's military in Ukraine. It's not good, and I Want to Live takes advantage of that fact. The program also offers the captured soldiers a voluntary route back into Russia by way of prisoner exchange programs, or if the soldier prefers, an opportunity to seek shelter in Ukraine or another European country once the war is over. In other words, some Russians are not only surrendering, but they're surrendering so hard that they escape Putin's clutches altogether. In fact, it was I Want to Live that publicized the data that United 24 media shared in a Telegram post that highlights the growing trend towards surrender among Putin's fighting forces. The number of Russians surrendering is increasing year after year. In 2025 alone, more Russian servicemen were captured than in 2022 and 2023 combined, the Telegram statement read. On average, 60 to 90 Russian armed forces servicemen surrender weekly, reaching 350 per week in August 2024. Since June 2023, Russian soldiers have consistently been captured more often than Ukrainian servicemen in Russian captivity. This is interesting data, and there's plenty more where that came from. Some of the numbers shared by the project reveal that what were previously rumors about the state of Russia's military are actually true. We'll start with the demographic data. According to United 24 media, the overwhelming majority of those captured, around 83%, are rank-and-file soldiers. These are typically going to be infantry and other low-ranking soldiers whose jobs will usually be to charge headfirst at Ukraine's drones while desperately hoping that they might survive. Only 13% of those captured were non-commissioned officers, with a minuscule 3% being officers. Not all of the soldiers will have volunteered to be captured, by the way. So what we're seeing here is that Russia rarely places officers in a position to get captured, instead preferring to let the cannon fodder, use an unsympathetic but not inaccurate term, put themselves in Ukraine's firing lines. It gets more interesting. A surprising number of the captured soldiers don't come from Russia. About 7% of the 10,000 captured, which amounts to around 700, have been identified as foreign mercenaries contracted from 40 different countries. Between 2 and 3 new foreign fighters are being discovered weekly. United 24 Media adds. Contract soldiers in general make up a large portion of the capture numbers. About 76% of those captured are contract soldiers, many of whom have come from Russia's prisons or private military companies. Mobilized individuals account for 19% of the captures, and conscripts, who Putin claimed would not be sent into battle when he started his war, make up about 5% of the captures. It looks like Putin was lying. If you have legs and you can hold a gun, you're good enough to die in Ukraine. In interviews with captured soldiers, Ukraine has also discovered that Russia engages in deceitful and sometimes coercive campaigns to recruit soldiers. Furthermore, many of those soldiers have criminal backgrounds or histories that would otherwise make them vulnerable to lucrative contracts that the Kremlin waves in their faces. Almost a quarter of the 10,000 captured soldiers reported that they were coerced or misled into joining Russia's military. That alone is revealing. It tells us that about 1 in 4 Russian soldiers really don't want to be where they are because they were forced to be there or lied to about where they were going. For a leader who demands unquestioning loyalty from his soldiers, Putin certainly seems to be keen on giving them as many reasons they can find to abandon his cause, starting with hiring them when they don't even want to be part of that cause. Putin also favors the criminally inclined, with 40% of those captured having criminal records for offenses that range from theft, assault, drug-related offenses to homicide. Around 38% of the captured soldiers were unemployed before they found their way into the Russian military. 30% hadn't completed high school, and only 7% held higher education degrees. We're starting to get a picture of the Russian recruitment strategy. Using coercion and lies, Putin is recruiting what could be considered among the most vulnerable in Russian society. He focuses on the poorly educated, perhaps because he believes that this segment of people is more likely to sign up for the rubles because they won't be able to earn anything like what the Russian military offers any other way. As for criminals, they have the choice of staying in jail or heading to Ukraine, and it implies a lot about Russia's correctional facilities that so many are choosing Ukraine. Then there are the sick. Ukrainian officials say hundreds of those captured also suffer from chronic health conditions, including HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, diabetes, and mental illnesses, United 24 Media reported. We mentioned earlier that these statistics confirm a lot of past rumors about reports of the Russian military. For instance, The Telegraph reported back in September 2025 that Dmytro Zhmylo of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Center had revealed that Russia was using sick soldiers to assault the embattled city of Pokrovsk. Those soldiers often have the diseases mentioned in the "I want to live" provided figures, and they're even forced to wear armbands that identify them as, for want of a better word, infected soldiers that Russia can use as cannon fodder in its assaults. The infected units are equipped similarly to other Russian military units. In fact, their level of provision is identical and quite low, Milo told The Telegraph in September, adding, "The only difference from the healthy military personnel of the Russian Federation is the various markings of the infected, namely the presence of special bandages." As for the undereducated that Putin's recruiters seem to target, their inclusion in such high numbers in the capture figures is indicative of what the BBC called Russia's transformation of war into a social ladder. In January 2025, the outlet noted that financial incentives have been Russia's main recruitment tool. Recruits at the time were being offered advance payments that were 450% higher than they had been previously, along with wages up to 600% higher than the average Russian income. That's a pretty tempting carrot on the end of the Russian stick. Putin just doesn't tell those on the lower rungs of Russia's social ladder that the stick tends to lead them into the path of Ukraine's drones. Russia's leader completes the deception by positioning service in the Russian military as the chance for the soldiers to take their place among the elite of the country's society. For both the undereducated and criminal elements that make up such huge portions of Ukraine's reported captures, that's a very tempting proposition. We will certainly continue to rely on such people in the future. They are the true, genuine, and authentic elite and pride of the country, the BBC reports Putin is saying in December 2024. Is it any wonder why so many who fall into the categories we've covered earlier sign up? When your alternative is life in near or abject poverty, a Russian prison cell, or a slow death due to a disease, a massive payday and the promise of being one of the elites of Russian society is huge. It's also likely a lie, as demonstrated by the fact that 1.22 million of Russia's soldiers have become casualties of Putin's war, including the 10,000 or so Ukraine reports that it's captured. You can't become elite when you have a bullet in your head or you've been blown up by a Ukrainian drone, after all. We also touched on Russia's use of foreign fighters earlier. It seems that Putin is more than happy to leave those foreign fighters, along with injured soldiers, out to dry once he's used them for his purposes. United 24 Media reports that the data shared indicates that Russia tends to prioritize ethnic Russians who have only been in captivity for a short period and have no serious injuries when arranging prisoner exchanges. The wounded aren't worth the effort for Putin, as they can't be sent back to the front lines. And if that seems like a harsh assessment, United 24 media says that Ukrainian officials have reported that at least 237 prisoners of war, or POWs, who have returned to Russia have ended up dying or have been reported missing in Ukraine after being redeployed. Another 4 have been captured for a second time, suggesting a consistent pattern of Russia taking back only its healthy-ish soldiers and then sending them back out to die. As for the foreign fighters, they seem to have little chance of returning to Russia, even if they wanted to. And that offers a perfect example of what Putin really thinks about the soldiers from outside of Russia who are signing up for his war. As Australia's ABC News reported in December, Russia has been working hard to get these foreign fighters to sign up. It's using social media campaigns, offering the same types of massive pay available to contract soldiers in Russia, and even dangling the prospect of Russian citizenship in front of foreign fighters. The end of 2025 has seen Russia try to close a growing manpower gap with this foreign recruitment. ABC News reports that the defense tech company Open Minds says that a third of the contract announcements that the Russian government now posts is aimed at foreign people. The number of those posts had hit around 4,500 per month by mid-2025, having previously hovered around the 100 mark a year and a half before. That tells us a lot about Putin's manpower situation. His own citizens are starting to wise up to what really awaits them in Ukraine, or there simply aren't enough ethnic Russians left for Putin to churn through, at least from the categories of people that Russian recruiters like to target. So foreign fighters it is, and those foreigners are in for a rude awakening once they reach Ukraine. Russia's refusal to take them back in prisoner exchanges is a blessing when compared to the fates that have befallen other non-Russian soldiers in the country's military. 3 squares, a bed, and the ability to call home is heaven compared to becoming meat for the meat grinder. According to a January 12th report in The Telegraph, Russia has now taken to press-ganging African people into becoming part of the Russian military, at which point they are sent on kamikaze missions. According to Ukraine's ambassador in South Africa, Oleksandr Scherba, Russia's treatment of its South African contract soldiers is indicative of Putin's disdain for all of the soldiers that Russia hires from the continent. There might be all kinds of charm offensives on the African continent, but once an African person comes to this war, they just become meat for the meat grinder, Scherba says, adding that Russia looks at Africa through imperial eyes. In other words, Africa is little more than a resource to be exploited from Putin's perspective, and that may make Russia even more willing to lie to get what it wants in the form of more contract soldiers from the continent. Those soldiers have little chance of receiving the many rewards that Russia offers them, meaning capture by Ukraine is often their best way out. This imperialistic attitude exists inside the Russian military as much as it does in the country's upper echelons. The Telegraph says that one video published on January 11th shows a group of African soldiers singing a song in their native language in a snow-covered forest. The Russian soldier filming the events comments, "Look how many disposables there are," before claiming that the soldiers will be singing differently once they're deployed to the front lines. That's a callousness that can't be excused by the fog of war, and it seems to come right from the top. The Russian soldiers that Ukraine has captured reveal patterns of coercion, deception, and outright loathing of the very people that Putin is sending to fight his war. That's no way to boost morale. The saddest thing is that Putin isn't looking for high morale. He wants unquestioning loyalty in return for the money that Russia offers, with that loyalty extending to a Russian soldier being willing to die when he commands it. Over 10,000 and counting either aren't willing or have been captured while trying. Many more are likely to follow if I Want to Live's claim that Ukraine captured more Russian soldiers in 2025 than in 2022 and 23 combined is anything to go by. That's another pattern. More of Russia's soldiers are ending up in Ukraine's custody, suggesting more than ever before are willing to raise the white flag to escape the horrors to which Putin subjects them. So we've seen the figures, and we know that Russian soldiers are surrendering at an incredible rate. But what does all of this mean for Ukraine? For one, every surrendering soldier amounts to the loss of somebody that Putin is paying handsomely and is relying upon to take part in assaults on Ukraine's defenses. Interfax reports that the largest numbers of Russian prisoners have been captured in the Pokrovsk and Bakhmut district of the Donetsk region, along with the Kursk region and the Pololi district of Zaporizhia. These are all regions where Russia has sustained massive losses in its fight against Ukraine, and surrendering soldiers have only exacerbated those losses by weakening the assaults that Russia launches. There's another interesting point here. Russia is the force that is on the offensive in Ukraine. That's an obvious statement, but it casts into an even harsher light Ukraine's revelation that it's now capturing more of Russia's soldiers than Russia is capturing Ukraine's troops. That shouldn't be happening. It's typically the offensive force that makes the majority of captures because that force is supposed to be working to take territory and encircle troops. Russia's maneuvers are so poor that its soldiers consistently fail to isolate Ukraine's defensive forces. Often, the attacking Russians get caught in traps of Ukraine's design or establish weak footholds that end up being encircled themselves, leading to captures. Ukraine also gains leverage from this volume of Russian surrenders. It knows that very well, which is why I Want to Live exists in the first place. The Irregular Warfare Initiative even goes so far as to call that campaign a form of psychological warfare for the modern era. By replacing traditional PSYOP or psychological operations methods with mobile technology and social media, Ukraine can now reach enemy soldiers through smartphones in their hands, aiming to stoke fear, spread confusion, and encourage surrender, the outlet says. In other words, Ukraine is using technology to plant the seeds of the idea of surrendering in Russian heads that may not have previously realized that surrender was an option, never mind one that could see them treated better than they're treated by their own officers and commanders. On the leverage front, capturing as many Russian soldiers as possible also means that Ukraine can bring back large numbers of its own troops when prisoner exchanges happen. Such was the case in January 2024, when Ukraine was able to bring 230 of its captured soldiers home in exchange for 248 POWs who were returned to Russia. There's also information to consider. Every captured or surrendering Russian soldier knows something. Ukraine can learn about the intricacies or lack thereof of Russian training methods from the rank-and-file troops that it's capturing. It might also learn about supply shortages in the sectors from which the soldiers were captured, or how large basic training classes were, both of which can give Ukraine an idea of what it can expect from Russia's future assaults. On the rarer occasions that an officer is taken as a POW, Ukraine could even learn about entire operations that it can then counter. The intelligence alone is important enough for programs like I Want to Live to justify their own existence. The damage that data shared by that organization and Ukraine's coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war does to the impression of Russia as a competent fighting force is a nice little bonus. Putin can't afford for so many of his soldiers to be surrendering to Ukraine. Russia already has a host of manpower problems, the biggest of which is that Ukraine is now killing more of Russia's soldiers than the country is replacing through its recruitment. Something big has broken in Russia, and that's a problem that is helping to loosen Putin's grip on his own military. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of the many problems that pervade in Putin's army. And thank you for watching.